Hey guys, I'm Dee. Welcome back to Delving into the Cold. I have a few announcements before we get started today. I did end up getting the John Bonet case posted on YouTube last week, so that's up. And as we all know, October is coming up, and I love Halloween. And I love pretty much all things dark and mysterious, so we're gonna do a special for the month of October called Dark Happenings Month. And that month I'm gonna have, hopefully, 6 podcasts and their videos posted, and each podcast is gonna be about something or someone that is quote unquote scary. We've got a full schedule up on Patreon, on the website, and on my Tumblr. But the first week will be about Vlad Tepes, then Elizabeth Bathory, The Legend of the Wendigo, Crossroads Legend, Cropsy, and then the last episode, which is going to happen on Halloween Day, hopefully, is going to be kind of a 2-part episode. The first part's going to be about the history of Halloween, and the second part is going to be the first ever, for this podcast, top 5, where I tell you the top 5 kind of darker things that really interest me. Alright, so without further ado, let's get started, and we're going to talk about Gloria Ramirez today. And I'm sure you've heard the term toxic lady in reference to Gloria. I'm not going to refer to her to that. I think that's disrespectful, and I don't think it's fair to her honor or her family to call her the toxic lady. She was married with 2 children. She was 31 years old, and she had been diagnosed with late-stage cervical cancer about 6 weeks before this whole incident happened. On February 19th, 1994, she was rushed to the ER at General Hospital in Riverside, California for rapid heart rate, low blood pressure, and incoherent speech. And so, that's kind of something that is not that abnormal for someone that's in late stage cancer, but nonetheless, they rushed her to Riverside, and immediately the ER workers started trying to treat her by using medication to stabilize her vitals. And unfortunately, this didn't have any effect on Gloria. But one of the nurses, when she was taking off Gloria's shirt to put on the electrodes for the heart monitor, did notice that Gloria's entire body was covered in some type of oily substance, and that when they got closer to her, her breath had a garlicky, fruity is the only description that I found for it, type smell coming from her mouth. And when they drew blood to run tests, they noticed that her blood had a strong smell of ammonia and had manila-colored specks floating in the blood, which is strange, obviously, and it kind of puzzled not only the nurses, but also the doctors on staff. They didn't have a clue what was going on. And so, not long after they started working on Gloria, 3 nurses kind of had episodes. One just straight passed out, and when she woke up, she couldn't move her arms or her legs. One grew faint, but didn't actually, pass out, and one just could not breathe. And in total, 6 staff ended up having adverse reactions after working with Gloria. And so they ended up clearing the hospital out and trying to, save Gloria, but also trying to contain whatever it was that was causing this reaction in people. Unfortunately, Gloria died a short while later, and upon her death, they called in hazmat, who came in and inspected the hospital and couldn't find anything. But they also took Gloria's body and sealed it in an aluminum casket so that any toxicity that was being released from her body would not be able to affect anyone else. And they waited like a week before they autopsied her. And that was simply because they were hoping that if there was any toxicity left, that by that point it had diminished. So she ended up having a total of 4 autopsies. And the last one took place about 6 weeks after her death. And in her blood was found Tylenol, lidocaine, and an anti-nausea medication called Tigan. Now, Tigan produces amines, which are related to ammonia, which may be why her blood smelled like ammonia. And they also found a substance called dimethylsulfone, which was in like a massive dose in her blood and tissue. And the thing about dimethylsulfone is that it has a half-life of about 3 days. And 6 weeks after her death, she still had 3 times the normal amount in her system. So that's a massive deal, because if she had that much 6 weeks later, you can't imagine how much she had on the day that she actually passed. Now, dimethylsulfone is used to reduce pain and inflammation. And anyone that's had someone in their family who's had cancer knows that, unfortunately, late-stage cancer produces just a mass amount of pain. And so a lot of cancer patients are willing to, do anything to get that pain to stop. So on April the 12th, 1994, the coroner finally announced her cause of death as kidney failure due to late-stage cervical cancer. And while there were mass amounts of ammonia and dimethylsulfone, it wasn't what caused her death. It did make her body still have kind of those toxic effects, but it wasn't enough to actually kill her. And they waited 2 months after she died before they could have the funeral, because they were afraid that someone would get sick at the funeral because of the levels of toxins that were still being released from her body. So let's talk about a couple of theories, not necessarily as to what she died of, because I think that that's kind of, you can kind of see that there's a combination of things there that could have resulted in her death. But let's talk about theories for what happened in the ER room that night that caused so much distress on the part of the nurses and the doctors and the other staff members. Now, General Hospital Riverside had been cited before for improper conditions. They weren't a clean hospital. They didn't do things by the book. And actually, Gloria's family believes that this is the reason for all that trouble. They believe that something reacted together with some of the medications or some of the procedures they used on Gloria, and that the hospital created this reaction in everyone else. But as I said earlier, hazmat came through and they did a search of the hospital, and they couldn't find anything that proved that. I'm not saying that it wasn't there, because it's definitely a possibility, but hazmat couldn't find anything, and if they did, they didn't tell anyone. Now, another thing that it could be was the combination of the medications that she was on, and the medication in her blood creating a toxic gas. I think that's also plausible. The ammonia and the dimethylsulfone both are pretty caustic medication or caustic substances. So I think that's a possibility. Another possibility that's been proposed is that the odor of her blood or her breath could have kind of sparked a mass hysteria from the one nurse who originally noticed it. And that's definitely possible. It would not be the first time that mass hysteria has created such a problem. And while I think that that's a possibility, I think that this next one that I'm going to discuss with you is going to be the strongest possibility and what most likely happened. Now, as I mentioned, she had a high amount of dimethylsulfone in her bloodstream. Now, the thing about dimethylsulfone, as I mentioned before, is that it reduces pain and inflammation. So back in the 1960s, they created a cream that people could use for all types of aches and pains or inflammation. Athletes used it a lot, and it was kind of widely available. Well, in 1965, the U.S. was like, no, this stuff is way too toxic. It's literally was ruining people's eyesight. I mean, there were just adverse effects to the stuff, and so they ruled it as too toxic for use. Took it off the shelves. But the thing about it is, it was later made into a degreaser. And while the cream was not nearly what you would call pure, the degreaser form of this was 99% pure DMSO, which is dimethylsulfone. And so Gloria's body was literally covered in it from head to toe. That's what the nurse had noticed originally on her. And the thing about DMSO is when it's exposed to oxygen, it creates dimethylsulfate. Now, dimethylsulfate is highly, highly toxic. It's a gas. And when it's inhaled, can cause lung issues, eye problems, convulsions, delirium, and paralysis. Which, if you think about it, kind of lines up completely with all of the symptoms that the staff at the hospital were experiencing that night. So, in my opinion, DMSO, when exposed to oxygen that created dimethylsulfate, that's definitely, to me, the strongest possibility because it kind of just lines up perfectly with everything that happened. And again, there's no proof. Nothing has been proven in this case, unfortunately. And unfortunately, for Gloria's family, they still don't have answers. So that's all I have on this case. It's an interesting case, and it's kind of scary to think about in a lot of ways. And there's a ton of information about kind of the process of what happened that night and things, but there's not a ton of information about what it could be. So let me know what you guys think. What do you think it was? Do you think it was DMSO? Do you think the hospital messed up somehow? Do you think that it was a case of mass hysteria? What do you think it is? So hit me up. Let me know what you guys think. Alright guys, stay safe, stay curious, and I'll see you next time.